What is more important, one's happiness or one's duty? What if you had a profound sense of obligation towards humanity? What if you wanted to give a gift that would greatly benefit mankind, but you had a feeling that what you had to offer would largely be rejected? You had a sense that pursuit of this path would lead you to be totally alone and miserable beyond anything, even though it could make everyone happy. What if you were forced to carry the heaviest burden of all? Would you give up and abandon it altogether, or would you drink the bitter cup? You sense that you could be doing so much more. You feel invisible, always to be rejected, and ill-fated to fade away. Most importantly, however, you feel invisible to God and feel like faith is too heavy a burden.
To all such I speak of the loneliest journey ever made and the unending blessings it brought to all in the human family. I speak of the Savior's solitary task of shouldering alone the burden of our salvation. Rightly he would say, I have trodden the winepress alone, and of the people there was none with me. I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold me.
I tell you to rebel against your fate. What is a rebel? A man who says no, but whose refusal does not imply a renunciation. He is also a man who says yes, and the moment he makes his first gesture of rebellion, a slave who has taken orders all of his life suddenly decides that he cannot obey some new command, wrote Albert Camus. I tell you to consider that you are not unlike God, the least popular being in the universe, because he also tells people what they need to hear instead of what they want to hear. When God came before us as Christ, everyone abandoned him because they could not understand his sayings and didn't like what he had to teach. Even his apostles left him, including Peter, who denied knowing Christ 3 times. Then only his mother, Mary Magdalene, and John the Beloved stayed by his side, but even they had to leave.
Now I speak very carefully, even reverently, of what may have been the most difficult moment in all of this solitary journey to atonement. I speak of those final moments for which Jesus must have been prepared intellectually and physically, but which he may not have fully anticipated emotionally and spiritually. That concluding descent into the paralyzing despair of divine withdrawal, when he cries in ultimate loneliness, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? The loss of mortal support he had anticipated, but surely he had not apparently comprehended this. Had he not said to his disciples, behold, the hour is now come that you shall be scattered, every man to his own, and leave me alone. And yet I am not alone, because the Father is with me. The Father hath not left me alone, for I do always those things that please him. With all the conviction of my soul, I testify that he did please his Father perfectly, and that a perfect Father did not forsake his Son in that hour. Indeed, it is my personal belief that in all of Christ's mortal ministry, the Father may never have been closer to his Son than in these agonizing final moments of suffering. Nevertheless, that the supreme sacrifice of his Son might be as complete as it was voluntary and solitary, the Father briefly withdrew from Jesus the comfort of his Spirit, the support of his personal presence. It was required. Indeed, it was central to the significance of the atonement that this perfect Son, who had never spoken ill nor done wrong, nor touched an unclean thing. He had to know how the rest of humankind would feel, us, the rest of us, when we did commit such sins. For his atonement to be infinite and eternal, he had to feel what it was like to die not only physically, but spiritually. To sense what it was like to have the divine Spirit withdraw, leaving one feeling totally, abjectly, hopelessly alone.
The atonement was the greatest act of rebellion, taking on everything and enduring the worst of it with no one to bear with him. Consider what Albert Camus wrote on the topic. Christ came to solve two major problems, evil and death, which are precisely the problems that preoccupy the rebel. His solution consisted first in experiencing them. The man-God suffers, too, with patience. Evil and death can no longer be entirely imputed to him, since he suffers and dies. The night on Golgotha is so important in the history of man only because, in its shadow, the divinity abandoned its traditional privileges and drank to the last drop. Despair included the agony of death. This is the explanation of the my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And the heart-rending doubt of Christ in agony. The agony would have been mild if it had been alleviated by hopes of eternity. For God to be a man, he must despair. Each time a solitary cry of rebellion was uttered, the answer came in the form of an even more terrible suffering, in that Christ had suffered, and had suffered voluntarily. Suffering was no longer unjust, and all pain was necessary. If everything, without exception, in heaven and earth is doomed to pain and suffering, then a strange form of happiness is possible. It is important to note that despite this French philosopher's profound understanding of the atonement, he was ultimately an atheist. He believed that humanity was left alone to rebel apart from Christ, and perhaps had even more the reason to be a rebel. We are born without any purpose, directionless. Since the world has no direction, man from the moment he accepts this must give it one that will eventually lead to a superior type of humanity. From a theist's perspective, consider now the Israelites fresh out of Egypt wandering, without any proper direction or purpose for 40 years in the desert. Or entertain Lehi and his family wandering in the wilderness after leaving the comfort of their homes. We will feel like these people just wandering, not knowing where to go for most of our lives, and oftentimes we will feel tempted to doubt the existence of God as we feel abandoned by him. But this teaches us to be makers of our own destiny, and not to be bogged down by a predetermined one, to have the freedom to choose God or reject him. Consider this thought experiment. Who has more freedom, the dreamer or the wanderer? According to the law of causality, the dreamer feels predetermined about a particular dream. Throughout his journey, he gets what he wants with little effort on his part, as though to confirm to him he was predestined to accomplish his dream. But now consider the wanderer. He too might have a dream, but fate seems to be telling him that he is forever doomed to wander in the desert. He is facing constant rejection and claiming no high reward. What's a man or woman to do in such a situation? Albert Camus tells us, the only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence becomes an act of rebellion. We learn that free will cannot exist without fate from this quote. We cannot rebel if nothing is oppressing us. Indeed, we are to understand that there cannot be rebels unless there are supporters of fate and predeterminism. For there to be free people, there must also be those that are not free. The wanderer actively rebelling against fate means continually struggling towards a dream. Even if one is rejected, one should rebel and continue to do things that get him rejected. He should remember, as a wise ninja once put it,
rejection makes a man stronger.
Even if no one watches your videos, make videos. Even if no one listens to your music, keep composing. Even if no one wants you to dance, you dance for the whole world. Even if you keep getting rejected for jobs or dates, keep going. Even if your skills never improve, keep training. Even if you are wheelchair bound, stand. Even if every drop of blood pours from your body, even if your bones are mashed to dust, even if your muscles ache and burn, even if you feel your stomach sink, even if your brain groans and your heart moans, stand for what you know and feel is right. Never waste a minute of your life. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Because his mind was free, Nietzsche knew that freedom of the mind is not a comfort, but an achievement to which one aspires and at long last obtains after an exhausting struggle. Even as I was struggling, I went to the temple. In the sealing room, the conductor encouraged the group to look at Doctrine and Covenants, section 128, for the importance of record keeping. And these are the words that stood out to me, that truth is bound in heaven, and the records which you write, even if you should go your whole life having your words and warnings ignored, that in all your recordings it may be recorded in heaven. And you shall judge the dead according to the words you write, which contain tremendous and mighty truths. But you need to write the words. Consider an analogy through one such as Vincent van Gogh. He wandered in a desert, he remained a nobody, everyone ignored him, and he lived in great poverty. Even when his depression was so great that he cut off his own ear, he nevertheless continued to paint, something that he was passionate about, the only thing that gave his life meaning. He died thinking he had contributed nothing to the world, thinking he would vanish in obscurity. But one day someone picked up one of his paintings and marveled at it. Now we know him as one of the greatest painters of all time. But even though you are unlikely to become like a Van Gogh, you should still live as he lived. Be passionate even when no one cares, even when the world is against you. Even if you are fated to fade into obscurity, if your words are truth, they will endure forever and judge the whole world. But further still, there is what Camus calls metaphysical rebellion, which is rebellion against God. I do not think this is the same as rebellion against fate, but rather a rebellion against a path that itself rebels against fate. That is, God rebels with you only for you to rebel against him. There are certain ways to rebel, specific ways to be ambitious. Contemplate for a moment the probability that when Adam and Eve broke the commandments of God to partake of the forbidden fruit, God told them,
"You always meant to defy me. That was the final trial."
Rebellion against God can be dangerous because it could mean not loving your neighbor as God commanded it. Actual rebellion against God means knowing him perfectly. Cain could rebel against God because he knew him personally and saw his face, but this led him down a dark path of murder and betrayal, to become a vagabond in the land, and the whole world turned against him, making rebellion against fate impossible for him. Thus we see that the way of rebellion is not a simple one. Laws, it would seem, whether natural or man-made, have their place. We should not think that we can rebel without consequences. Life itself is meaningless without consequences. The concerning factor would be whether our rebellion propels us upward or downward. Absolute dominion by the law does not represent liberty, but no more does absolute anarchy. Laws give us direction and tell us which options are good and which ones are bad. Today, many fulfill the prophecy of calling good evil and evil good. They blur the lines between everything imaginable. At the point where it is no longer possible to say what is black and what is white, the light is extinguished, and freedom becomes a voluntary prison. The Wright brothers could not rebel against the laws of physics to enable man to soar through the sky until they understood those laws of physics, and why they were there. But there remains even one foundational way to rebel against God. Elder Jeffery Holland tells us in his book, Christ and the New Covenant, one of the most extraordinary righteous acts of rebellion against God came from the brother of Jared, otherwise known as Moriancumer. God found something striking in the childlike innocence and fervor of this man's faith. Behold, O Lord, thou canst do this. In a sense, there may be no more powerful expression of faith spoken in Scripture. It is almost as if the brother of Jared was encouraging God, emboldening him, reassuring him. But then Moriancumer saw the finger of God and was shocked, for he was not supposed to see God's finger. He then encouraged God to reveal himself to him. And so the mighty Lord Jehovah appeared to him, showing him his spirit body. And God said, Never have I showed myself unto man whom I have created. But indeed God had shown himself to mortals before, as unto Adam, Eve, Abel, Methuselah, Enoch, and Noah before Moriancumer. Was this an error on the part of the writer of the Book of Mormon? Elder Holland gives us this explanation, that it was not an error. Students of religion sometimes ask, can God make a rock so heavy that he cannot lift it? Or can God hide an item so skillfully he cannot find it? Far more movingly and importantly, one may ask here, is it possible to have faith so great that even God cannot resist it? At first, one is inclined to say that surely God could block such an experience if he wished to, but the text suggests otherwise. And so Elder Holland rewords Jehovah's declaration as, Never have I shown myself unto man in this manner, without my volition, driven solely by the faith of the beholder. And so it was that Moriancumer rebelled against God and thrust himself through the veil, not as an unwelcome guest, but perhaps technically as an uninvited one. The scriptures tell us that this was because of his knowledge, for he knew that it was the finger of the Lord, and he had faith no longer, for he knew nothing doubting. What a remarkable doctrinal statement about the power of a mortal's faith, Holland tells us. So rebel, throw off your shackles, free your mind. In your most hard-trodden moments, rebel against society, fate, and God himself. Just be careful how you rebel, for there is often only one right way to rebel that does not lead to self-destruction. But the question remains, what will you do to rebel?
What if a child dreamed of becoming something other than what society had intended for him or her? What if a child aspired to something greater?
Thank you for watching. Tell me about it in the comments section if you disagree with anything I just said. And be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon so you can be updated on new videos, so you can continue to correct any of my errors or share a personal opinion. And remember to keep it righteous.